most live streams, they take a while to sort of cook up whatever it is that they want to get out or the message that they're trying to relay to the world. I'm just going to tell you out flat that I think Sean Strickland is going to do very well in boxing. And in particular, the reason why is because he's got the particular style to be able to do it. Not only does Sean Strickland have the potential style to go into boxing, but also I think the motivation is also another factor in and of itself. Well, let me explain why. For one, here's something you got to understand, right? The UFC out flat is not giving him the rematch. And what's really interesting about that is the fact that even though the UFC is all about business in terms of who gets the most pay per view clout and who has the most followers and things of that nature, they're still not going to give him the title shot for the simple fact that Izzy and Dricus Duplessis happens to be a way bigger matchup than Sean Strickland or just Dricus Duplessis in and of itself. Now, look, here's the thing about it, right? Dricus Duplessis, I'm sorry to say, is not a Conor McGregor. He's not a pay per view star. Now, is he popular in his parts of, let's say, South Africa, or something to that extent? Yeah, absolutely. He is absolutely a popular figure in South Africa. Now, why would he not be? Obviously, this is a new sport in that particular country, and he is already a world champion. So naturally, the people of that region are just going to get behind him as a result of that. So, for the rest of the world, they don't really know him in that particular matter. They don't know who he is, why you should be motivated to go see him fight. And once again, this is just something that you have to understand. However, even though Dricus himself is not a pay per view star, he is a big draw when it comes to fighting somebody like Israel Adesanya. There's no doubt about it. And the reason for that is because, once again, I've mentioned this plenty of times over and over again, why he is a big draw when it comes to fighting Israel Adesanya because of the racial implications that their fight has going on. There's a historical implication behind it because obviously of the turmoil that goes into, let's say, South Africa, but there's also a particular beef that is documented and recorded, and not only that, video clips of Israel Adesanya stepping into the cage, dropping the N bombs after N bombs after N bombs towards Dricus Duplessis' way. So as a result, this fight is going to captivate the imagination of many fans around the world. And Sean Strickland, I'm not saying that he's not a pay per view draw, but this is one of those strange circumstances where it just so happens that Dricus Duplessis and Izzy are just a bigger matchup than Sean Strickland, even though Sean Strickland is a pay per view star. Let me say that again so that you can understand in full context what I was trying to relay to you. Okay? Let me say that again. I'm going to say that again. Israel Adesanya and Dricus Duplessis are a bigger draw, even though Sean Strickland by himself is already a big draw. And that's just what we have to contend with here. So, in result of that, Sean Strickland is very disgruntled at the reality that the UFC wants to reject his rematch clause. Even though, I got to be honest with you, there's a lot of people that say Sean Strickland won that fight. I've said this over and over again in this particular content, in this particular channel, that he didn't win that fight. Wrestling wins fights. Okay, it's not about the striking damage or anything like. Now, obviously, it's a very subjective opinion, isn't it? Right? But what is mixed martial arts? It is an art that mixes all the arts all together. And if you're not doing that, well, unfortunately, then you don't get to win the fight. Now, was Sean Strickland doing very well on the stand up department in that? He absolutely was. And by the way, guys, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button as I continue on talking about why Sean Strickland is going to go into boxing. So here it goes. He's got the style for it. Not only does he have the particular style to compete in boxing, but he also has the notoriety to make enough money depending on what kind of opponent he's going to face in boxing. Now, let's just call it what it is, right? Jake Paul is a potential in that matter, fighting and boxing and making a whole lot of money. Why? There's history behind that. And the trash talking that both of them are going to produce in that fight, I think is going to be highly entertaining. But not only that, we're going to see Sean Strickland in a different competitive field that we've never seen before, and perhaps maybe even create a second lane and a career in the world of professional boxing. Also, I think that, let's just be honest. I don't Do you honestly think that the UFC is paying Sean Strickland the type of money that he deserves with the notoriety that he has garnered? In my humble opinion, no. I don't think that the UFC is paying him enough. But we also have said, and Brendan Schaub himself has even mentioned this plenty of times, Conor McGregor is the most underpaid fighter of all time, just based on the ratio that he brings into the company. Now, is he doing better than guys that are into prelims or guys that really don't have that type of clout or notoriety? Yeah, absolutely, he does better than those guys. The problem is, though, is that he's not there yet. He's there, but he's not there yet. And let me explain what that means. He's already in a fixed contract. So, in other words, whatever type of contract he had going on prior to becoming a champion, it's set in that particular stone. So, in other words, guaranteed, if you're a champion in the UFC, you're going to make a half a million. Guaranteed, right? But then when you're not the champion, well, I think you're going to go back down to your original contract. Now, was he making somewhere around the six-figure range? Yes, we can absolutely argue and say that Sean Strickland was making somewhere around the six-figure range, but not the half million range. Now, let's go into boxing. There's a government out there that is paying boxers an insurmountable amount of money. And who is that? None other than Saudi Arabia. So as a result, guess what? It's creating a lot of fighters, both in boxing and MMA, to sort of think about the type of deals that they want in the future. And in this particular case, Sean Strickland really has a great opportunity if he can get out of the UFC contract. And by the way, for those of you that are just tapping in right now, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'm going to tell you what Sean Strickland needs to do or what he can't do in terms of going into a highly paid boxing match in this particular instance. For one, obviously the ironclad contract that the UFC has with their fighters. Now that Sean Strickland is a big figure in the game of mixed martial arts and has a huge following, I got to tell you that the UFC takes notice of this. Their PR departments, their marketing team, everybody that's involved in the company in terms of looking at the numbers, looking at the facts and figures, so they're going to go and move within this particular direction in terms of how they're going to, let's say, negotiate his contract or how they can lock him down. Because let's be honest, if you're somebody like Yoel Romero, he was a little bit older, he was already behind his prime. Not only that, let's just be really honest about it. Even though he is a huge figure in the world of mixed martial arts, he's just not that popular. And the proof of that is now that I mentioned Yoel Romero, all of a sudden a couple of people had left the live stream because I had mentioned him. So now let's get back to talking about Sean Strickland as a result of that particular mishaps, right? Because that's just the reality of it. That's one small proof that I can show you that he's just not a big name. So now here comes the numbers popping back up again. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button as I talk about Sean Strickland and why he needs to go into boxing. Well, for one, he's going to continue to get underpaid. He's already mentioned this when he was fighting in the Apex Fight Nights that he believes that mixed martial arts fighters, and in particular, most fighters, are nothing but prostitutes. And there's something truthful about that, right? But when you have the boxing market out there with the Saudis, and even without the Saudis, even way before them, there's a certain market in boxing that sort of alleviates that notion that you are a prostitute. But in this case, I guess you can say that you are a high paid level prostitute in that particular instance, right? Because the Saudis are there, and then even before them, there was people that really paid a whole lot of money in order for them to see big boxing matches, especially if you have a big name. And by the way, uh, yeah, mixed martial arts fighters who are going into boxing or transitioning into boxing are really no different in that particular instance, right? So he's going to be one of them, or he could just be one of those boxers that's going to be exploited in order to create a bigger name for, let's say, an up and coming boxer or a boxer that's already established in the likes of, let's say, Anthony Joshua beating Francis Ngannou. But nonetheless, we've said this over and over again, right? Fighters in the UFC are absolutely underpaid, and because of that, the motivation for boxing is in even higher demand now. And then on top of the fact that Saudi Arabia is willing to throw a little bit of their investment into the sport, I think really creates a different motivation for a lot of fighters now, and even future fighters that are coming up. Now, imagine if you have the choice right now as a future mixed martial arts fighter or as a future boxer. Let's say you're a kid that's doing taekwondo or kickboxing. By the way, how about Ricky Hatton? For those of you that really don't know anything about some of these famous boxers that are multimillionaires now, the likes of Ricky Hatton, he used to be a kickboxer. He even competed in it when he was a kid. Manny Pacquiao even trained Muay Thai when he was a kid. But obviously, boxing just pays a whole lot more money. The Klitschko brothers, they also had a kickboxing background. Terrence Crawford had a wrestling background. There's no money in wrestling whatsoever, even if you were an Olympic champion. Sergey Kovalev was also a boxer. I'm sorry, a wrestler before he turned into a boxer. So, if you're a youth today with aspirations of being in the world of combat sports, and you look at the exploitation that happens in the UFC in comparison to, let's say, boxing, where are you going to go? Who are you going to sign with? And what are you going to motivate yourself into training for in terms of what is going to be more lucrative for you and your family? Now, obviously, boxing is the answer to that, or is it? But here's the thing, the UFC has to operate the way that it does. And this is not in any way to knock fighter pay or anything like that. I've come to the realization as a full, mature, grown adult that doesn't just listen to the narrative of the fighters or doesn't just listen to the narrative of Ariel Hawani and simply take into consideration that the UFC has a budget. And for the same reason that we love the UFC, for the same reason that we love what they are about, this is also the reason why they are as successful as they are, for the simple fact that they are able to hold down a budget, not overpay fighters, and stay themselves in line in terms of making enough money so that they can generate more investments for the next event and also maintain at float whatever business budget they have going on for future references in whatever endeavors that they're going to operate in. That's the reality of the UFC, and you have to accept that. So, in other words, the reason why we see all these big matches that we've seen over the years in the UFC is for the simple fact that the Saudis are willing to pay. I'm sorry, that the reason why we're able to see these types of matchups that we see in the UFC is because uh, a lot of these fighters are underpaid. So as a result, they have to somehow overcompensate for their financial losses. So they have to fight over and over again. But you, as a fan, and me as an observer, what we see is nothing more than just great fights after great fights as a result of that. So you have to take all of this into consideration before you give, let's say, a harsh criticism on the UFC or the way that they handle business. And by the way, a lot of people always talk about that one day this whole fighter pay is going to change, that all of this is going to be in the favor of the fighters. I'm sorry to tell you, it's never going to be like that. Never was, never will, never ever will be. Why? Because for the simple fact that fighting has always been nothing more than an opportunity, not a career. Anybody that thinks you can come into fighting as a career, I think you're sadly mistaken. Now, are there other avenues that you can create in the world of fighting? Yes. For example, you can create lanes and become, let's say, a manager. There's money in that. But you would also have to manage multiple fighters in order for you to generate really not only a lucrative income, but sometimes even just a livable wage. So that's one. You can open a gym, and sometimes a lot of that is predicated on members of your gym that are non-fighters. So in other words, you charge $100 a month for members to come into your gym, and that's the number one money generator for your revenue that you're making in the fight world, rather than, let's say, some of your fighters are paying you a small percentage. And by the way, this is something that I find really strange about MMA management, and I sort of understand it, right? Now, there are managers out there that will take a huge pay cut. For example, Ali Abdelaziz. Now, with all the criticism that comes in Ali's way, I think a lot of people forget that there are two different worlds when it comes to mixed martial arts and its business. There is the world of the internet, where a lot of you have this subjective opinion on certain fighters and managers and how they treat them. And then there is the world of actually being in the industry of mixed martial arts, being in the gym, being in these guys' contract negotiations, and actually trying to not take too much of a high percentage so that these fighters can live in a livable wage. And by the way, Ali Abdelaziz is exactly that type of guy. He is a type of guy that will take a pay cut or won't take any cuts at all until their fighter starts making money. And this is the reason why he has some of the top fighters under his banner and under his well, whatever you want to call it, I guess, management team, because he's able to do that. Now, there are obviously other fighter managers out there that have a little bit more of, let's say, a predatory practice in terms of how they're going to deal with their fighters. But the reality is that these are the ways that you can make money in the fight world. And guess what? Even nutritionists. I know guys that are nutritionists in the fight game. For one, Eric Trilogy, a friend of mine who, by the way, has also is the nutritionist of Logan Paul, Jake Paul, and the notorious Conor McGregor. He's even worked with Israel Adesanya. He's worked with Ryan Garcia. These are just the names of where this buddy of mine, Eric, works for. Now, he obviously makes a very good living out of it, because you look at where this guy lives. He lives in Malibu, down in Southern California. And if you know anything about California, or just the housing market up here, man, I'm telling you, it's very difficult to own a house, let alone buy one in Malibu, California. Now, how is he able to afford that? Well, because of the multiple clients that he has. So there are ways to make money in the fight game, but you know who makes the least amount of money in the fight game? The fighters themselves, unless they create a certain lucrative deal for themselves. And quite frankly, this is the way that the business has always been, even way back in the world of boxing. Their whole entire ethos is this: they want to keep you broke so they can keep you coming back. And I'm talking about the fighters. Now, Sean Strickland can continue to play that game. So, what does Forza say here? I am pretty sure their coaches and trainers make a lot less than they do. With one fighter, yes, Forza, they make a lot less with one fighter. But if you have multiple fighters, then you're going to make a pretty good living. Now, take a look at Faraz Zahabi. I think it is fair to say that Faraz Zahabi has made the majority of his money with George St. Pierre and Rory McDonald, and among other big names that are fighting in the UFC, the PFL, and all the other leagues that he has worked for in terms of bringing these fighters up to compete in them, right? But that's what you have to do. Now, there coaches out there that don't make that kind of money? Yes, absolutely. I've known a lot of coaches in the fight world, in the amateur scene, in the pro scene, and everything in between, that have to take side jobs. Okay, and then that same goes with the fighters as well. But yes, obviously, coaches make a lot less money, but that's why coaches train only one or a few guys. And by the way, here's the thing about this, right? This aspect of team culture in MMA, I think, is very weird to me. And I think this is where boxing sort of has it correct. And I think right now, I just came to the revelation just based on this gentleman's comment here that I think the reason why coaches sort of lump all these fighters together in a training room or in a practice room is simply because they need to in order to make it a lucrative endeavor as a coach, because otherwise, why else would you do this? There's no other reason for you to do that. Look, I'm going to talk about training right now, right? Because obviously it goes into the subject of coaches making money in this particular game. So here it goes. It's not conducive to have a bunch of killers training with you on an everyday basis. Is it good? To a certain extent, yes, it is good. I think if you're an amateur, it's probably good because you need to be able to understand and know the type of levels that there are out there in terms of jujitsu, in terms of grappling, in terms of striking. You need to be able to have a great understanding of the levels that are out there and what is presented to you. So as a result, maybe it is good for you to train with a team in your amateur days. But if you're in the pros of mixed martial arts and you are in the big leagues, I think you need to have individualized training in the way that they do in boxing. In other words, hyper focused, concentration on one particular fighter. Now, why is that somewhat impossible to do for some camps? Because simply the coach and the coaches need to lump all these fighters together in order for them to gain enough money to pay the bills in the gym, and not only that, pay themselves to have a livable wage to become a coach. So this is something you have to take into consideration. Another notable coach or fighter that I've trained with, I don't know if you guys know this guy's name. Does anybody here know who Justin Buckles is? Team Alpha Male guy, right? Now, if you are a hardcore fan, I guarantee you know who Justin Buckles is. I trained with Justin Buckles back in 2011, 12, 13, 14. I've had experience with Justin Buckles. Also, the area that I currently live at right now in West Sacramento. By the way, I urge you guys to look up the Van Gogh Museum at West Sacramento, right? The area where I live at. That area that was the Van Gogh Museum or the Van Gogh Art Gallery used to be the gym of Justin Buckles. Okay, so what had happened to the gym of Justin Buckles? It shut down during the pandemic, and as you could imagine, why? So, as a result of Justin Buckles' gym shutting down, all of a sudden these hipsters came in to West Sacramento, swooped it all up, and turned it into a Van Gogh museum. Yes. So I urge you to look up Van Gogh Art Gallery on West Sacramento, and that's literally where uh, Justin Buckles' former gym was at. Now, what was it like for Justin Buckles as a coach? Probably a little bit harder. He did have a few championship fighters. Obviously, TJ Dillashaw comes to mind, Cody Garbrandt comes to mind, and a whole list of many people that he had coached over the years. He was a UFC fighter, but he was a fighter when literally these fighters were making less than 10 grand a fight. So put that in perspective. So for those of you that had just tapped in right now, don't forget to like and subscribe, but also rewind back to what I was talking about with Justin Buckles and his gym that he had out here that was replaced into a Van Gogh museum. And it kind of gives you a little bit of a perspective of what these coaches make and the struggles that they deal with. So going back to Sean Strickland, he has to make a choice. Is he going to continue to live this kind of life of mediocrity in terms of pay? Because let's just be honest, if Conor McGregor is the most underpaid fighter there is, now can you imagine what Sean Strickland is or will be in that aspect? Because look, he's already has a fixed income in terms of what they're already giving him. Is it fair, that particular fixed income that Sean Strickland has going on? No. I'm going to tell you why. The reason why it's not fair for Sean Strickland to have the type of income he has or the lack of is for the simple fact that Sean Strickland is now even more popular than he has ever been. So the fact that he has been way more popular than what we would have expected him to be, I think really lends itself to a certain level of exploitation that he may not have really anticipated. And why? Why is that? Because it is a UFC's job to lowball you. Going back to the budget that I was just mentioning in terms of how they make their money, how they make their bottom line, and how they're able to, let's say, uh, get to the next show or get to the next fight night and whatnot, right? This is what they have to do. So Sean Strickland can still make them a whole lot of money, but Sean Strickland is not going to be compensated handsomely in the way that he should be getting paid. So here's the thing about this, right? There is an opportunity out there for a lot of these fighters to make more money. And why is that? The Saudis are the reason for that particular notion. Now, the Saudis don't have to worry about making a bottom dollar or making a return investment to any degree. Their motivation of putting up these fights are just something that you as an average person are not going to understand. And by the way, there's a geopolitical aspect to it. And if you want me to get into it, no problem. I'll get into it right now. So the reason why the Saudis are doing this is for the simple fact that they are trying to create tourism for their country. Is it because maybe at some point oil is going to start running out? Yes, that's a great possibility. Nothing lasts forever, including uh including oil. Oil is not going to last forever. I mean, it comes out of the ground and obviously it's very lucrative and this and that. It has been the main staple of their economy for a certain number of years now. But at a certain point, it's going to run out. So what do they need to do? Well, they have projects where they are building new cities. They have projects where they are creating, let's say, um, uh, concerts, tourism, attraction to be able to have people come into their country. And by the way, boxing, MMA is one of them. Now, with the UFC, strangely enough, they are also going to be in business with the Saudis. Now, what does this mean for them? And more importantly, why did they somehow agree to this? I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you the reason why the UFC had agreed to this is because it is the aspect of if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. Do you honestly think that the UFC, Endeavor, the guys that own the UFC, right? TKO, WWE, all this one company that is all rolled into one. You can add Disney into that, although their deal with Disney is more on the side of, let's say, TV distribution deals. With that particular aspect, do you think that this company from America and this financial firm from America has more money than the Saudis? Honestly, ask yourself that. And I think the right answer is no, they don't. They don't have the type of money that Saudi Arabia has. That's just the reality of it. But they know that they can't compete with them because the reason why the UFC was still able to beat all these other companies in the past is for the simple fact that they spent way too much money beyond their budget, and as a result, they went out of business. Elite XC, Strikeforce got bought out. Bellator got bought out by the PFL. The PFL is next to get bought out because guess what? They had Francis Ngannou only for Francis Ngannou to just stay in boxing. And as a result, while he's staying in boxing, they're not giving him he's not giving them any MMA fights, which is what they originally had brought him in for. They had brought him in to do boxing, obviously, because that was the main attraction of why they were able to sign him. But he's also not holding up his end of the deal in terms of MMA. And then when he comes back to MMA, he may just potentially get slept because now he's weakened his chin after the Anthony Joshua fight. That's the absolute reality of it. So PFL may be the next one to get out of business, unless, of course, the Saudis come in there and pump a little bit more money into them. So the UFC knows this, so they have to play ball with the Saudis as a result of that. So now that's where you're at with the UFC and their partnership with Saudi Arabia. But also, there is a conflict of interest in that notion because guess what? Guess who wants to go into boxing? Literally, almost every person in the UFC roster. They see the type of money that is coming into boxing and they think to themselves, man, you know what? We need to hop up on this. But at the same time, they are also a business partner with the UFC. So who knows? But for now, this is all that I really have for this particular subject. Obviously, Sean is going to stay with the UFC. He's not going anywhere. Conor McGregor is not going anywhere. And his title fight and rematch against Dricus du Plessis is going absolutely nowhere because they're going to give it up for Izzy. And that's just the reality of it. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you want more particular information on this topic, look up the video that I had made on a live stream called South African History X, where they had just announced the fight for Dricus and Israel Adesanya. So I will see you guys in the next particular content, and I will see you guys soon in the next videos to come, inshallah.